Thanks very much indeed for your patience. I know you've all been waiting very patiently as we mobilized this panel. I want to thank you all for coming to Kurdistan. On behalf of the American University of Kurdistan, we're delighted to be hosting you all. We do have a rather special panel. Boris Johnson needs no introductions. He's known for many things. Most recently, he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. During his tenure as Prime Minister, he shepherded the United Kingdom out of the pandemic. And let me say, as a fellow Brit, Boris, I thank you for your service during your time as Prime Minister during the pandemic.
We did our best. We did our best.
I should also acknowledge in that same breath the vital contribution that his vaccines minister made at the time.
There he is.
Kurdistan's very own Nadeem Zahawi.
That's right. Yeah.
This session, we've had plenty of discussions on the region, its prospects for de-escalation. Israel and Hamas has come up very extensively. But we're going to use this opportunity to look at some of the bigger trends facing the region, facing the world at large. Most importantly, my intention is to tie in some of these global affairs and issue to events here in Kurdistan. And I will have some challenging questions for you, Boris. I hope you're prepared. Before I do all that, before we unpack all that, Boris will be giving a keynote, and I'd like to give you the floor, Boris.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Over here. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Randy. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Ewaratan Bash. It's great to be here. Great to be here again in Kurdistan. And thank you to the American University of Kurdistan for the honor you've done in inviting me here. And I want to thank my hosts. Can you hear me? Yes? I want to thank my hosts for making me feel so at home by organizing such prodigious quantities of rainfall today. Now, I was talking to the distinguished former President Barzani this morning, Erbil, and he reminded me that it was only a few years ago that the Kurdish Peshmerga were in the forefront of the fight against an evil death cult called ISIS or Daesh. And as mayor of London, I came out here to see what the UK armed services were doing to help the Peshmerga and to help the Kurds. Because after all, we in London were facing the same challenge in our city from people who were being infected by the same nihilist ideology, and literally the same, and who were killing innocent people in London in appalling terrorist attacks, bombings, stabbings, as you will remember. And at that time, young Londoners were actually coming out to Iraq and to Syria to join these people. Do you remember that? And to marry them, for heaven's sake, because they were being radicalized by these people in their rooms at home in the UK. So your fight was our fight, and your war was our war, and what you were doing, your battle, the battle of the Peshmerga, was also a battle to protect us in the UK. And I remember going out to a military camp near Erbil in defiance of the wishes of my Foreign Office advisors, I think. And I met some UK officers who were training the Peshmerga. And I saw an AK-47 lying there. And they said, Mr. Mayor, whatever you do, don't pick up that gun. You mustn't be pictured with a gun. And I ignored them completely, of course. And I posed lying on the ground, pointing the AK-47 in what I thought was the general direction of Daesh, of ISIS. And I had no hesitation in doing that because I feel a solidarity with the Kurds and with your struggle. And you then went on to overcome that enemy. You won. And I want to thank you again. I want to thank you for your heroism, the heroism of the Kurdish armed forces, the Peshmerga. And I have to tell you that that photograph of me, there was no bullets in the AK-47. I was completely not a threat to anybody. But that photo went around the whole of the UK, I'm proud to say, and there was an election that year, some of you may know, when I was standing in a London seat, and I was amazed by how many people turned out to be of Kurdish origins in London and the support that I had. And I learned from that the importance of the Kurdistan and of the Kurdish people in the fight against extremism. And if I have one message to you today, and as an oasis of freedom and democracy in this region, and if I have one message for you today, is that the UK state, Britain, the United Kingdom, as long as I have anything to do with it, and beyond, will continue to stand with you. Because that threat can emerge again. And I'm afraid I'm starting to see signs, some signs, that it is going to emerge again. And together, we've got to do everything in our power to make sure that that kind of nihilistic death cult extremism never again threatens the people of Kurdistan or the region. And it's more vital than ever now, with all the uncertainties that Ranch has rightly talked about today, it's more vital than ever that we are united in protecting our collective values, freedom, democracy, human rights, when they are grievously under threat from people who are willing to use force to terrorize civilians, to commit massacres of the innocent, whether in Ukraine or in Israel. And we should never, therefore, forget the modern history of this autonomous region, which I remember reporting on it when it happened at the time. I think I was at the European summit when John Major proposed that there should be safe, I think probably Francis was there too, there should be safe havens for, because I think you were European minister at the time, safe havens for the Kurds because of the appalling treatment of that people by Saddam Hussein. And that was way back in 1991. And what Saddam was doing, is I of course don't have to remind you, but I'll say it anyway, he was using absolutely egregious and cynical methods to terrify innocent communities. Poison gas, bombing, you name it. And it was that major government in 1991 that proposed the safe havens. And I think it's really grown from then. And it's incredible for me to come here and see modern Kurdistan, to wake up in Erbil as I did, in an absolutely colossal hotel room, so big that I couldn't find the bedroom. I mean, I found the bedroom eventually, but I couldn't, and then I couldn't find the bathroom. It was enormous, a fantastic place. But I looked out and I saw all the construction that's taking place in Erbil, and I thought of the amazing potential of this region. And I want to say how much I congratulate Prime Minister Barzani on what you've been doing, on your economic reforms, on what you're doing with digital banking. It's got to be done. You know, I think government in the UK is taking a while to to do some of these vital reforms. You're getting on and doing it, and I think it's absolutely vital, and I congratulate you. And by the way, can I say how good it is to see the unity of Kurdish politics incarnated here on the front row in the form of the KDP and the PUK. And that is very, very encouraging to see as well, of course, as Kurdistan's #1 export to Britain, my old friend and colleague, Nadim Zahawi, who, as was correctly pointed out earlier, was the architect of, I have no hesitation in reminding him of this, I'm sure he'd say the same, the fastest rollout of vaccines anywhere in Europe, which helped us to come out of lockdown faster than any other European country. So thank you, Nadim, for what you did. And it was and that was, I think, a manifestation of natural Kurdish energy and drive. Wouldn't you say, Nadim? I don't think he would dissent from that. I think it was a wonderful thing that you organized. Look, I just want you to know that you are going to have, Kurdistan is going to have our continued support, my continued support in this complex world, particularly given all the complexities of your relations with Baghdad. You are going to have all my support in ensuring that we get solutions that are fair to the aspirations of the Kurdish people, that respect the rights of the Kurdish people, that respect the rights and obligations of the federal system, because I believe that justice requires it. And I think that any excessive attempt to centralize and not to respect those rights, speaking from experience, will only be deeply counterproductive. So it's vitally important that we stick up for the rights of Kurdistan and for your economic freedom as well. Now, when I talk about your economic freedom, I think it's vital for this whole region, because as I say, you are an oasis, a beacon, a landmark in a way that is very different from many other parts of the Middle East. And last time I was here, I was very proud to visit what was then the largest Jaguar showroom, Jaguar Land Rover showroom anywhere in the Middle East. And I believe that it still is. In fact, I'm told that it's getting bigger and bigger, and that the proprietor of that JLR showroom has actually decided to buy another plot of land. Is that right? I'm delighted to hear it, because actually what I did then was, in order to promote Jaguar Land Rovers, I got into one of these beautiful machines and I got behind the wheel and I drove out into the traffic of Erbil, slightly to the surprise of my security people, who immediately tried to stop me. But my objective was to promote Jaguar Land Rovers, and I think I've been successful, because I'm told that the sales continue to expand. And I'm delighted to see that there are now more than 200 companies, British companies, that are doing business here, and that our trade is up 83% year on year, and that one company in Halabja alone last year exported 22 tons of pomegranates. Can you believe that? 22 tons of pomegranates to the United Kingdom, which is a lot of pomegranates. And we have done that, and we're doing that, even without direct flights between London and Erbil. And if I think there's one thing we need, I hope you all agree, it is direct flights now between London and Erbil, because there is a huge market for it, and the sooner the airlines get on and deliver it, I think the better for Erbil and the better for the people of London and the UK as well. So thank you very much for your kindness in inviting me today, and may the the ideas germinating in this conference, may the seeds of the ideas be as densely packed and as profuse as the seeds of a halabja pomegranate itself. And may our friendship grow ever stronger and the partnership between the UK and the people of Kurdistan go from strength to strength. It has been an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I would not have missed it for the world. Zaspas, everybody. Thank you all very much.
Very good job. Thanks very much, Boris, for your remarks there. There's so much to unpack in that speech, but I'm going to start here at home in Kurdistan. One of the themes you alluded to in your remarks was the future of the Kurdistan region. And this ties into the title of this particular panel, because this session looks at the future of the Western-led international order. And I always say, if you want to look at the state of the Western-led international order, the international system, take a look at the West's friends, the shape they're in, the position they're in, and that tells you a lot about where the West itself stands. Now, Kurdistan is currently under pressure as a result of several factors. Most urgently is the pressure it's under from malign actors and institutions, hostile actors and institutions in Baghdad. And I would personally say that this can be tied directly to the legacy of Western engagement in Iraq over the past 2 decades, but also as a result of, let's say, the West's pivot to Asia with its increasing focus on China as a result of its growing rivalry with Beijing. How can that be addressed in this current tumultuous global climate? President Biden said a couple of weeks back that America can walk and chew gum, but I think the reality is a bit different when we look at the execution, the practicalities of Western engagement in the region as a result. I'd like you to answer that question just to kick things off.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty massive question now. I think you'll agree. I think that what you're really saying is, how can we encourage America to take up its responsibilities as the global hegemon, which it is. And frankly, I'd rather have America as a global hegemon than any of the other candidates. I mean, there may be people in this room who disagree, but I would much rather have American leadership. And I think when you look back at the period you've just mentioned, you can see America, I think we've got to accept that what we did in 2003 was not well thought through, right? That we didn't have a plan, and we had utter chaos. But then, having done it, we made it even worse, in my view, by pulling out totally in 2011. I think the situation became even worse. And when you look at what's been happening over the last few years in Syria, in Afghanistan, you're seeing signs of too little America, not too much, in my view. And I think when Assad was able to bomb his citizens without any kind of retribution, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the failure to punish Putin for what he did in 2014 in Crimea, you're seeing a sense that America is not willing to act. And that's even worse than America acting, right? Both things can have terrible consequences. But a failure of leadership, or an absence of leadership, a void, is worse sometimes than firm leadership. And all human institutions involve a leader. And global politics is no exception. And so somehow we have to encourage the US to remember that it is the last best hope of Earth. And, when you look at American politics today, it's very, very interesting because, and I'm going to say something maybe surprising. I think when you look at some of the things that Donald Trump actually did, as opposed to the things he said, or some of the views that were attributed to him, you can see him taking steps to assert American strength abroad, like with the bombing after the Assad use of chemical weapons, or what he did with the Qasem Soleimani, or whatever. You can see an American willingness, a Trump willingness to engage. And so I think my message to everybody today who's thinking about what's coming down the track, and if indeed it is going to be President Trump, there may be some interesting upsides to that. And you're not reading about that much in the global media at the moment. But if you look at the record is very different from the stereotype.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, essentially...
It is interesting. I thought that was interesting.
Correct me.
By the way.
More than interesting, more than interesting. I mean,
people don't write that very much.
Right. Because in a way you're emphasizing, stressing the role and importance of the individual and not the government or the state per se.
Yes.
Now, you played a rather critical, if not instrumental role in galvanizing the European response to the war in Ukraine. And history is made by individuals, their convictions, their impulses, their ideological outlook, and their sense of ownership and responsibility, quite frankly, towards global crises. So therefore, is it right to say that if you're the Kurdish leadership here in Kurdistan, it's not so much the government or the state, but rather the individual around which an outlook, whether it's a 5-year or 4-year outlook, should be devised?
Yeah, look, I think you're totally right, Ranji. I think it's, in history, in politics, I'm afraid individual actors almost always do make a profound difference, and the choices they make can really affect how things go. I'm not a Marxian believer in huge trends that, I mean, I think they're also important, but in the end, individual human beings can make a profound difference, and you've seen that in repeatedly in the history of this just in this century. Look, would anybody else but Putin have been quite so nutty to have invaded a fellow Slav country like Ukraine? I mean, no democratic leader would have done that, because you would have had. I couldn't have got away with it, because I'd have had sensible people on the Tory backbenches telling me who would have all revolted if I'd tried to do that. Democratic systems don't allow that to happen, but because you have basically a tyrannical system in Russia, Putin was able to get away with an absolutely disastrous mistake. And if you look at and talking of American intervention. Look back at 2014, we did nothing. But who was the US president who gave the Ukrainians javelins? Or, who was it?
It was Biden.
No, it wasn't Biden. Close. The guy before Biden. It was Trump.
Right.
Trump. Yes. He, contrary to all the rhetoric about American, being pro-Russian and whatever the compromat that Putin is supposed to have and all this kind of malarkey, the stuff that went on in the hotel, whatever. Actually, he gave the Ukrainians the javelins. And I think that was very important. And that paved the way for the United States for Joe Biden to take a very different approach on Ukraine than he did over Afghanistan, which was a great thing.
Just to interrupt you there, so the issue here is that US politics is volatile, and whether it's Kurdistan or other regional actors, you simply cannot afford to rely on the possibility that the next guy in charge will be a good friend, a good ally, a responsible leader.
And so that's right. So what I'm trying to get over to you in my relentlessly optimistic way, is I think people are currently excessively pessimistic about the prospects of, from an international, I'm an internationalist. I think that there is every chance that America under a Trump presidency, just as it has been under a Biden presidency, will assume its international obligations, perhaps even more so. Perhaps even more so. Well, that's the paradox I want you all to think about today. Because if you look at the record, Trump intervened in it at times when Obama did not.
Fascinating stuff. Absolutely, in many ways. Lots to scrutinize on that topic, but I'll move on to another.
Well, you can disagree with me.
I think we can disagree on the sidelines rather than now per se. Otherwise, we might be here all day.
This is the nature of informal debate of the kind that we champion in a university.
I agree. You want to do that now? Boxing gloves on, or?
I don't know.
I'll tell you what. How about?
Well, you said something like there is much to challenge in what you've just said.
Here's what it ultimately comes down to, in my opinion. I'm not going to talk about Trump himself personally, but rather whether the individual per se is sufficient, because Trump represented himself in many ways, rather than necessarily an entire category of politics. He wasn't a Democrat. He wasn't a Republican.
Yeah.
He won.
But he was a Democrat, actually. Then he became a Republican.
He won because he is Donald Trump.
Yes.
And quite frankly, I don't think that's reliable enough. If you're a regional actor looking towards the future, if you're going to look after your citizens, their well-being, and so on and so forth, there needs to be some kind of stability in your partner. And again, this is not about Trump per se, but rather the kind of politics that unfolded in the U.S.
Well, I accept that.
Let's move on from what I think to what you think.
I see what you're saying. You have a good point, but I think there are grounds for cautious optimism. That's what if you look at the actual record, I think there are grounds for optimism.
Right. How about China? This is a region that is looking increasingly towards China, not because it wants to. It still wants the West as a partner, but it sees the West as no longer being a reliable and committed partner. The West is letting its friends down in the region. And I'm not just talking about Kurdistan. I'm talking about several GCC states and others. China is exploiting that perception. China is exploiting that strategic vacuum that the West is leaving. And I will challenge you a bit as, using your UK hat here, because the UK played a critical role in actually opening up the pathway for increased, closer ties to China under David Cameron, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah.
So is there room to coexist in the region, coexistence between the West, America, its European allies, and China?
China and America are economically like Siamese twins, okay? It's madness to think that you can decouple America from China, or that there's going to be some great wrenching apart of the world economic system. I happen to be in the headquarters of Walmart not so long. You know what? Walmart in Bill? Is in?
I don't think
well,
so.
Walmart is the biggest company in the world. It's got 2.3 million employees. It's bigger than the Chinese army. Walmart. It's bigger than the National Health Service in the UK, which is 1.7 million, I think, roughly speaking. Nadeem, is it? There or thereabouts. So it's huge, and Walmart is basically works with China in the most incredibly intimate way. So 80% of Walmart's manufactured goods. It's, as I say, the biggest company in the world, also the biggest company by revenues. Do you know what Walmart's revenues are? $680 billion a year, right? One company. And they get 80% of their manufactured goods from China. A Walmart bicycle is 92% from China. A Walmart laptop, 92% from China, and so on. You name it. Now, are you really telling me that it's in the economic interest either of the United States or of China to change that relationship? Of course not. It's not going to happen. And China is a great fact of our lives. It's a fifth of humanity. And it's a wonderful country, a wonderful people. We don't particularly want, in the UK, we don't want the Chinese in our critical national infrastructure. We don't want Huawei in our 5G networks. We don't want them running our nuclear power industry. But that doesn't mean you've got to have a Cold War with China. I'm against having a Cold War with China. I'm in favor of engagement with China. And so that's how I would do it. And that is what the Americans do, by the way.
Right. And what would be your warning to the region at large when it comes to the possibility of increased ties to China, potentially, especially if it comes at the expense of relations with the US or the West?
You're much better off going with Western capitalism, but basically, far, far better to go with investors like, Jaguar Land Rover. Or when it comes to green technology, which is, I think, what the government of Kurdistan is doing so well in, and championing investment in new green industries. There are trillions and trillions of dollars available in Western capital to get these things going. And I would I recommend that you go with that rather than with the Chinese approach. Because do you want me to go? I'll go in a minute.
No, you stay where you are, Boris.
No. Because the Chinese approach very often is to build up a dependency, to build up a sense of obligation, and to build up a commercial dependency, which is a bad thing for many countries. And I just, speaking entirely freely, a lot of countries around the world have got themselves into terrible debt with China. They don't enjoy the experience. Get Western capital to help finance the green technology revolution, the switch to green technologies that you're rightly doing. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Let's talk about green. Prime Minister Barzani, in his opening remarks, stressed the importance of combating climate change. Kurdistan, Iraq, is the fifth most vulnerable country to the effects of climate change. Nobody can really understate the devastation. Overstate the devastation of climate change and all its implications, both in the near future and the long term. And I know this is an issue that's very close to your heart. As Prime Minister, you passed a number of legislation that addressed this issue, but it seems like the international community, not just the West, is falling asleep at the wheel when it comes to this.
So right. You're so right.
What's your reaction to that?
I want to echo very much what you just said about Prime Minister Barzani and what you're trying to do in Kurdistan. It is a huge challenge, but it's also an opportunity, because I think the commercial benefits of going green and switching to renewable technologies and all the jobs that they can create is fantastic. And in my own country, there's a bit of a kind of debate going on, and we want to, people want to reopen the coal mines and stuff like that. Margaret Thatcher, as you may remember, you keen students of history here at the American University, Margaret Thatcher, who was a former Conservative Prime Minister, went to a great deal of trouble to close the coal mines in the United Kingdom because, well, she didn't do it for environmental reasons, really, to be totally honest. She did it because the unions were so difficult. And it's madness to go back to coal or to think that hydrocarbons have got to be your long-term solution. Yes, they have a role, and of course they're very important in this region. But in the long term, the opportunities of solar, of wind, nuclear, these are phenomenal. And we've shown in the UK that you can really produce huge amounts of domestic electricity with renewable supplies. And I think at one stage we are producing more offshore wind energy than any country in the world.
Let's also talk a bit more about that in the context of decision-making. As former Prime Minister or as Prime Minister, you underwent numerous domestic political battles. And sometimes politics, governance is slow, it's bureaucratic.
Yes.
You've got rivals who are trying to get you. You've got the system that's stacked against you. The nature of governance is simply complicated and congested.
It's the worst system in the world except for all the others. It's called democracy. Yes.
So the question really is, How do you break through that barrier? How do you tear down that wall when it comes to getting things like green legislation through, or mobilizing allies, partners, or speaking to long-standing friends and getting them to stand by your side, to support you? Tell us a bit about your time as Prime Minister and how that can be undertaken.
You've just got to be very persistent. You've got to hire some great people, like Nadeem, to get your vaccine rollout done. But you've got to be very persistent, and you've got to believe in what you're doing. But I think that we've got to face it. You know, we're two democracies, and we're facing a big challenge to democratic systems at the moment. And we've got to stick up for democracies, because in the end, they're better and they work better than their rivals. And look, I mean, just ask you, did anybody here get vaccinated with Sputnik, for instance? Did anybody use Sputnik or Sinovac from COVID, I mean? No, the vaccines that worked were made by the liberal capitalist democracies, right? They were made by private sector investment in giant pharmaceutical companies that actually were responding to shareholder value, not the dictates of politicians, and they produced efficacious vaccines. As I said earlier on, in a democratic system, Putin would never have done anything as arbitrary and stupid as invading a neighboring great Slav country. He just wouldn't have done it. His backbenchers wouldn't have let him. Xi Jinping, in a democratic country, would never have gone on with lockdown, his policy, far beyond the point when it was clearly democratically tolerable. So it may be painful, to get to your point, right? It may be painful, it may be exhausting, but it is better than all the alternatives. Plus, it produces far better music and far better restaurants and nightclubs. And what else do we have in London? Museums. Nobody I mean, I don't know about you, but nobody travels to hear Chinese or Russian techno funk, do they? They do travel to hear Taylor Swift. I don't listen to Taylor Swift as much as I should, but I'm sure you do. But you see what I'm trying to say?
I see your point. I see your point. Absolutely.
If you look at the music the world listens to, the films the world wants to watch, the clothes the world wants to wear, the culture that the world loves and admires, it tends to be those things that come from liberal capitalist democracies, as well as being the real scientific breakthroughs. So however grim and difficult it may be to run a liberal capitalist democracy, don't give up on it, is what I would say.
Well, one of the, we had a workshop yesterday, and one of the observations was that those actors, like Kurdistan, who have a historic track record for abiding by international norms, democratic values, have been let down by Western powers in favor of those actors, in fact, that do not abide by international norms, that are not democratic. To be more specific, the Kurdish Liberation Movement, for example, has a history of not committing massacres, goes out of its way to ensure civilians are not harmed during conflict, whereas Kurdistan's rivals, its enemies, have massacred, have committed ethnic cleansing, and yet some Western countries still continue to appease those actors. What's your response to that?
I think what you said is absolutely right, and I think it's why I've always insisted, ever since I've had anything to do with it, that we in London prioritize Kurdistan, and we recognize its vital importance for the region. And look, let's not mince our words. One of the problems we've got now in Baghdad, let's be absolutely clear, is that it's not entirely obvious to me that it's just the Iraqi interest that's being represented in Baghdad, right? And it's pretty clear to me that the influence of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Quds Force or whoever is being felt there. and maybe this is not a particularly tactful thing to say, but I've never been famed for my tact, and I'll repeat it. It is very, very important when things are difficult that you recognize, that we in the West recognize a place that is really unique, that has immense qualities, that is an oasis of liberal capitalist democracy in a very difficult and troubled area.
Right, right.
And that we do everything we can to support, as I said in my speech, the rights, the economic and political rights of the people of that region.
Right.
And that's what I believe the UK is going to continue to do, and I will give it every possible encouragement.
Let's say you're providing a recommendation or advising the Kurdish leadership, or any leadership in the region, in fact. President Xi turns up and promises an economic package over the course of 20 years, let's say 10 to 15, worth billions of dollars, fundamental, crucial to the economic revival of some of these countries. The US president also offers the same package. There's a crucial difference there. You know the president of the US that you're speaking to might not be around in 4 years' time. But you do know President Xi of China will most likely, highly likely, be around 10 to 15 years. In other words, one is actually capable of fulfilling a promise to that particular leader or government in the region, and the other one, again, very frankly, is not, because of democratic governance, because of democracy. What would you recommend to that particular leader who is considering these two packages, these two offers?
Well, I hope you took in what I was saying earlier on. All the people, you go to the UN, or you talk to countries around the world, in whether in South Asia or Latin America or wherever, people who have built up, Africa, built up colossal debts to China and find themselves now in a very difficult position. And they don't like it. And isn't it much better to have the active and voluntary investment of Western capital markets, helped and triggered by the actions of friendly, liberal capitalist democratic governments that will deliver long-term change for the better in your economy and your ability to tackle climate change or whatever? I think that's the way I would go myself, rather than getting on the hook to Beijing. That's what I would do. And yes, of course, it's a defect of democratic systems that leaders are removed. I'm speaking entirely personally, in a way that can seem to the leader at the time to be totally irrational. And yeah, that's a feature of democracy. But them's the breaks. And better to have that system in which fundamentally the people are in charge.
Right.
Better to have a democracy, not just because of the constraints that it provides for the rulers, but also for all the other economic and cultural, scientific reasons that I've just given. It is the liberal capitalist democracies that actually produce the breakthroughs. If you talk about China, look at the US in the last few years. The growth in the US, the economic growth in the US has been absolutely staggering. I think in 2008, the EU and the US were of roughly the same economic size, about $14 trillion. Does anybody know this? But I think the EU was slightly bigger, about $15 trillion. And the EU has 580 million people, by the way. The US has only about 330 million. Today, 15 years after the crash, 15 years after 2008, do you know what the figures are? The size of the US economy? The US economy is guess how many trillions it is now? Anybody know? Well, Nadeem says it's 31. I think it's about 26 or 27 trillion. The EU is up only to 17 trillion. Right. So the growth in the US has been phenomenal. And if you're asking, where should you bet? If you're Bill, wondering, which place to look to for the long term, go to America, fly over America, and you see it is a vast, rich, temperate, fertile, and above all, grossly underpopulated country. Where is everybody?
Right.
You compare it to India or China. These are ancient. The per capita, the population per square mile in India and China is about 5 or 6 times bigger than in the US. To say nothing of Europe.
Sure.
The US is in its infancy as an economic actor, and to get back to my first answer to you, Raj, we've got to make the Americans, encourage the Americans to understand this and to be a bit more self-confident about their role in the world. Because I think that one thing we've been suffering from is an absence of American leadership rather than an oppressive American leadership. If I'm honest, that's what I think. I think both things are bad, I guess, but I'd rather have American leadership than not.
Absolutely. I mean, we're about to wrap up. So I do have one final question for you, Boris. Politics is dynamic.
What was that note about, by the way, that you got?
You'll get to know in just a few moments. You know, you spoke of your fondness for Kurdistan in your speech, and politics is dynamic.
Yes.
And I know there's a real possibility of you returning as Prime Minister in the UK.
Well, no. Well,
now, given your fondness for Kurdistan, do you promise, here and now in Kurdistan, to support, recognize an independent Kurdish state if you return as Prime Minister?
Well, I'm going to. So let me first of all deal with the hypothesis, all right? Because what I always used to say was that I had about as much chance of being reincarnated as an olive, or being decapitated by a frisbee, or locked in a disused fridge, as I did of becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I then did become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, so I had to rethink my statistics. But I think it's very unlikely that the eventuality that you described will happen. But here's what I will tell you. Whatever I do, whatever incarnation I have, I'm going to be backing Kurdistan for the reasons I've given. And now, as for the exact status of Kurdistan within the Great Comity of Nations, that is a democratic question. You would not expect a politician, if any of the wonderful gentlemen in the front row were to come to England, to the UK, and to say what a fine thing it would be if Wales or Scotland were to detach themselves from the United Kingdom, it would be a bit of a shock for at least some people already in the United Kingdom. What I can say is I think it's a democratic matter for the people of this country. It's got to be a democratic matter for the people of this country. But irrespective of what path Kurdistan chooses, I'll say 2 things. Number one, you will have our support. You'll certainly have my support. You'll have the UK's support. But number 2, the rights, freedom, even the existing constitutional settlement has got to be properly respected so as to recognize the legitimate aspirations of the people of Kurdistan. And if that doesn't happen, as I said earlier on, if people feel that they are being shortchanged, if they feel that they're being taken for granted, if they feel that they're not getting parity of esteem, then that will have very, very bad long-term consequences. So it's very much in the interests of the Baghdad government to sort this out. That is my view.
Well, that's a very fair answer. I think we can all agree on that.
Good. That's about as diplomatic as I get. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Boris. Before we conclude, I believe His Excellency Prime Minister Barzani has a gift to give to you. And that particular gift is pomegranates and honey from Kurdistan.
Pomegranates, fantastic. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Prime
How did you
Minister,
get so many pomegranates so quickly?
Hold on.
Look at that.
Mr. Prime Minister, please allow me on behalf of MAPS, the American University of Kurdistan in Duhok, the audience, and people of Kurdistan, once again welcome you to Kurdistan and to the city of Duhok.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarkable speech and also your valuable panel here today. We all enjoyed it very much, and I'll tell you what the note was. I just wanted him to not conclude the meeting, the panel, without giving me the chance to come here and on behalf of the audience and the Kurdistani people, give you a very symbolic thank you gift. You talked about the pomegranates, so I'm going to give you a box of pomegranates of Kurdistan, and also I would like to tell you that we believe we have the best honey in the world. I'll also give you another box of honey.
Thank you.
I hope that you'll have a taste of it. So thank you again.
Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister Barzani. Thank you very much. I've heard about the honey. Thank you. Oh my goodness. Oh, those are huge. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh my God, thank you very much. I love honey. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Boris, thanks very much indeed. Very good conversation. Bye-bye.